There are people who I guarantee you will hear this and say, that general shouldn't be talking about politics. And to them, I say, I'm not talking about politics.
From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush in New York City.
And if you think this is about politics, then you need to rethink what politics means in America. Because what I'm talking about is something that goes way beyond the political realm.
With patriotism so often twisted into nationalism, religion hijacked for political advantage, and our military co-opted into the personal fantasies of a dictator, it's time to talk about the intersection of these three impulses. And I have literally the best guest possible to do that with, retired General Charles D. Luckey. His service included combat missions overseas, as well as leading the entire U.S. Army Reserve. He's also an attorney and a very smart thinker about the direction of our democracy. Plus, he's a PK. His dad was a pastor. He's the perfect person for us to talk to today. We need these voices to be heard now more than ever. Please make sure you subscribe, share, and rate The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us to have you do that. Our library of past conversations includes almost 150 hopeful, empowering, and inspiring interviews with guests like Congressman Jamie Raskin, Amy Spitalnik, Wajahat Ali, Bishop Marion Buddy, and many, many others. Now, you can help grow The State of Belief with a financial contribution today. Find out how at stateofbelief.com and how you can support and join the work of Interfaith Alliance at interfaithalliance.org. So before we get into the conversation with the General, I do want to flag a couple really important things that are coming up that Interfaith Alliance is taking part in, along with many other groups, including faith groups. The first is that you are going to be seeing soon something called Recommit to Pride, which is something that Interfaith Alliance came up with. We were just recognizing that we're seeing kind of this weird pullback right now among corporations mostly, but also, there's just, even in colleges and other places, people are pulling back from this idea of how do we support the LGBTQ community. And what we decided we wanted to do was say, actually, religious communities are not going to do that. In fact, we're going to be courageous, and we are going to go even further in and say, part of our faith commitment is supporting and loving our neighbor, whether that person is lesbian, gay, transgender, or bisexual, or questioning, or queer. We want to be loving towards everyone, and we want to show up this Pride. Pride Month is June. It is in remembrance of the historic events at Stonewall. And, just reminding people at the Stonewall Memorial, which is now a national memorial, they actually took out the T. That was something that the Trump administration did pretty early on. They erased the trans participation and, signature role in actually the Stonewall riots, Stonewall uprising. And so we're up against a lot. We're seeing a lot of, even public support has been slipping just a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. And it's worrying because we need to make sure that everyone feels loved, everyone feels respected, and especially as people of faith, we have to show up. So please look, what we're doing is we're inviting everyone to sign your name and just say, this year we recommit to Pride. We will show up with love, support. We will even maybe offer a prayer in our service if that's the right thing to do. We will show up at at parades and with just a showing to the community that religious folks, and the people within our communities who are LGBTQ, and also for the wider LGBTQ community, that faith groups are not sliding back like so many others. So please look for a opportunity to sign, recommit to Pride, share it with your friends, share it with your community, and let's make sure that we show up this year, especially in this really challenging moment. The other thing I want to flag for people is June 14th. June 14th is No King's Day. This is a national movement, and so you can find out more at nokings.org. Interfaith Alliance is taking a really strong central role in this, making sure that faith communities also turn out for this mass mobilization. I think we're trying to get 5 million people to show up across the country. The context here is that President Trump has decided to have a personal parade on his birthday, and he's using the military as a prop. I mean, it is the 250th anniversary of the American Army, and so there are observances for that. But he decided, okay, let me subsume the anniversary of the American Army and have them parade by me. And it's just like every bad, terrible image that you remember seeing from any despot, any dictator has had the military, and you can imagine, how he's going to use this as a optic lens. Well, we have to create a counter lens, and faith communities have a really important role to play already. Listen, by the time you hear this, there will be 600, 700 active organizing efforts in communities around the country. Go on nokings.org. You can see the map. Get involved, especially if you're a faith leader or a faith community, or just make sure that you're showing up as yourself, as your full self. If you want to participate in organizing, this is just a really important way. It will be so important that as, there's this photo op happening in D.C. with this wannabe dictator, by the way, who avoided the draft with his bone spurs, who has denigrated the military in so many ways. He denigrated John McCain. Do you remember that? We said, I like people who didn't get captured. John McCain was a hero who actually got captured. He was a prisoner of war, and Trump denigrated him. We can't let him have this photo op and not call it what it is, which is ridiculous and also just shameful. This is really bad news. The way we counter it is say, we the people reject the idea that you are a king with your own army. We the American people will celebrate that day for all of us and totally undercut this image that he's trying to create of him and his pet military. The military is an American military. It is for the Constitution and the upholding of all the people. It is not his prop. And so I just encourage you, look around. Find a place where you can plug in with No King's Day. It's so important that millions of us show up on that day, and also people of faith recognizing we don't recognize a king in this country. We have our own faith traditions that have a higher power, and we have a constitution that brings us together as a people. Diverse people, free to be who we are. We don't recognize a king and his pet military that he's trying to pretend like is his on his birthday. It's disgraceful. So look, nokings.org. And if you're interested, reach out to Interfaith Alliance and we can help you with resources on how to show up on that day as faith communities also declaring no kings. And now to my guest. This week on the show, we are honored to welcome retired Lieutenant General Charles D. Luckey, former Chief of the United States Army Reserve and a distinguished leader with more than 4 decades of service. Throughout his military career, Lieutenant General Luckey held command positions around the world and was widely respected for his strategic vision and deep commitment to the Constitution. Now retired, he continues to speak powerfully on the responsibility of citizenship, the urgent need to preserve democracy, and the importance of defending religious diversity and freedom in America. You can imagine why I wanted him on the show. As an attorney, he has a deep understanding of the legal restrictions the administration is defying and the significance of all the threats to the judiciary branch of government, as well as where the military fits into all of this picture. I am so grateful to you, General, for joining us today on The State of Belief.
Reverend, it's awesome to be here, and I appreciate the time to speak with you and your team and your listening audience.
I will say you are the first general we have had on the show. One of the things you and I have talked about kind of offline was how important it is for the various sectors of society to be in conversation with one another, especially in this moment when democracy feels under stress, at risk even. But before we get into all of that, and we will get into all of that, I would love for you to talk to us a little bit about where you're coming from. I mean, you have a lot on your resume, and you're still a young man. So tell us where you grew up, how you got to these. I mean, you've been in the middle of some of the most important geopolitical moments in the last 50 years, and you have training in the military as well as legal training. Tell us how you got here. Like, what's your background? Where did you grow up? What were your parents' life? And how did religion play into all of this?
As luck would have it, I'm sitting right now on the front porch of my mom's old house. It was built in the mid 70s, but it's built on land that's been in the family for over 120 years. And so as you talk about where did I grow up, I mean, I sort of grew up a lot of places like a lot of us, but I learned how to fish in the Bantam River and the Chippewa River, which are less than 150 feet from me here. So it's sort of a good way to start off.
And here is where?
Washington, Connecticut. So I'm in the Litchfield Hills. That's just west of Litchfield and east of New Milford, Connecticut, sort of the northwestern part of the state. And as luck would also have it, my mom actually, who was a Democrat, ran for office here back in the 90s and won, which is interesting because it turned out she was the first Democrat since FDR, and she was the first woman, and I've now been told the last woman to ever be first selectman of Washington, Connecticut, which is kind of cool in its own way. So, and she's passed on, as my dad. My dad, just so your listeners know that when I say I'm nonpartisan and I am rapidly independent, it's because my dad was a Republican, my mom was a Democrat, and here I am. So a couple of just tidbits I think maybe that would be helpful for your listeners. So I was raised in New England, born in Ohio. My dad was a congregational minister in the United Church of Christ. Had gone to seminary after college. He served in the Second World War. My grandfather had served in the First World War. Both of them were enlisted soldiers. My grandfather, who ended up earning the Silver Star, unbeknownst to him until years after the First World War, never could get past the rank of private first class because every time he made corporal, he got busted back down to PFC for fighting. But he served in the trenches in the First World War and then came back to the States. And like a lot of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Guardians who served the nation, and I don't want to leave the Coast Guard out, returned back to civilian life and worked in New York City. My dad served in the Second World War. He was in China. He was an anti-aircraft 40 millimeter Beaufort Canada crewman. 4 days after he graduated from high school, he was inducted like everybody else in the Second World War into the military, served his 3.5 years and returned to civilian life, went to college, went to the divinity school at Yale, and was a congregational minister and died back in 1975, which is a story for another day, but clearly had an impact on not only my life, but also, frankly, my entire philosophy of life and my perspective on many things, which frankly have informed my experiences, both a lawyer and as a leader in the military, because I'm a big believer in what I call leading with love. And I think I learned that from my dad and from my dad's early passing on back in the 70s. So went to boarding school in New Hampshire, went to University of Virginia, undergrad, got recruited into ROTC by a buddy of mine who was a scholarship student. I wasn't. I had hair down to my shoulders. And about the fourth or fifth week of my first year at UVA, this kid came out of our dormitory and he's wearing an Army uniform and didn't have much hair. And the guy looked vaguely familiar. I realized it was a guy who lived on my hall who had hair down to his shoulders. And back then, this is right after the Vietnam War and the draft was over. And if you could fog a mirror, you could get into ROTC. At least that's how I did it. But he had pinned his hair up under this wig and was wearing it to drill. And so he started slowly, subtly nudging me into joining ROTC, promising me that I could get an A in military history and that would help my GPA, which was true. And so that's how I got sort of roped into ROTC. Graduated from the University of Virginia, spent my sort of formative years as a line officer in the infantry and then special forces. Then went back to law school, was in the JAG for a while. Left the Army active duty after the first Gulf War, went into private practice in North Carolina for a long time. Stayed active in the Army Reserve, was recalled back to active duty as an infantry officer because I had transitioned back to infantry when I left active duty, and served in Iraq, and then ended up serving on the Joint Staff, and then ended up serving out at U.S. NORTHCOM and NORAD in Colorado, and then pulled back to Washington, D.C. So to serve as the chief of their Army Reserve. And so I think a lot of us, sort of just way leads on to way, and there was no grand plan at all.
Yeah.
I just sort of ended up, it's like Virgil said, right? The fates call whom they can, those whom they cannot, they drag. So I got dragged, but here we are. So
all right. Well, we're already quoting Virgil, so I think we're doing pretty well.
That's the only Virgil I remember. But
no, you don't have to say that. That's fine. We know you could just quote it off the tip of your tongue.
Yeah.
I do think that the mixture of having this framework of religion going into the military, also introducing the legal framework into it, and then you were, I think you kind of skipped over it, but you were in a very central position in Iraq. I mean, you were very much involved in trying to figure out what could be done there that would be productive and positive. And so you've seen a country that was trying to figure out, like, how do we reconstitute ourselves? How do we create a country and figure out a way forward? And you and I actually met. I think the listeners might find this interesting. We met before the last election in a tabletop that the Brennan Center put on. And it was basically trying to game out what would happen with the Trump administration. And we had different sides. I was typecast as radical red activist. I haven't actually talked to my listeners about this, but yeah, I was.
You did a brilliant job, by the way.
Yeah, actually, it was very funny. Like, people were like, "You're scary good at this," but I was, you
scared me, and I'm a retired 3-star. I'm like, man, whoa.
Yeah. But because I've been so kind of immersed in the rationale and the fervor of the very hardcore white Christian nationalists who were like really pushing and demanding for their way forward. Now, when we think about what we were doing that day, I just remember there was a moment, and I guess it wasn't you who said it, but I was sitting next to, I did 3 of them. So there was someone who was sitting next to me who just kind of interjected, "Just so you know, the military will not save us," in that moment. And I don't know if you want to quibble with that. Later, I was like, what does that mean? Because I think there was an idea, if our society tips too far into autocracy, the military is just not going to go against the president because that's the commander in chief. I don't want to put you in an awkward position, but would you quibble with that? And I know I'm starting out with a pretty big one, but I think a lot of us are figuring out, like, what's going to happen? Like, how are we going to save our democracy? And as the thwarting of the Supreme Court starts to get more and more apparent, what will keep us on the track of democracy? And how do you understand the military's role in that?
So you're right. It is a big question, particularly right out of the chute, other than where am I sitting right now? But it's a fair question. So I'm not going to duck it. So first of all, I get asked that a lot, frankly. A buddy of mine who's a retired academician and a former president of a fairly large university and an author, sent me a note the other day and asked me, "So what's the military going to do?" And so I get asked that a lot, and my answer is going to be probably, I'll just say, unsatisfying. But the answer is, I'm not exactly sure, because I think so many different factors play into answering that question intelligently. I mean, some of it has to do with at what point in time does that question get called? Does it get called at all? What has been done between now and then to make sure that our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, coasties, Guardians understand their constitutional responsibilities? So I do agree with the fundamental premise that if we, the American people, are looking for the cavalry, to use obviously a bad metaphor here, but to come over the rise to save us from ourselves. I think that's a challenge. That's a problem for a democracy. Period. Um, so I'm not trying to be guarded. But I am trying to be nuanced because I think it's an important question. I think the answer is it depends on a lot of different things, and one of them, and I will go this far because you mentioned it earlier. Um, you know, I took an oath to the Constitution of the United States, and the first time I took it as a regular Army officer was a second lieutenant at the University of Virginia in the spring of 1977. And the oath is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and to take the obligation freely without any purpose of evasion, and to faithfully and well and faithfully execute the duties of the office upon which we've embarked. And so I go back to, and if you remember General Milley's sort of sign off as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and his emphasis on the oath and that it's to support and defend the Constitution, and it's not an oath to a person. And frankly, it's not an oath to a piece of ground or to the motherland or the fatherland. It's an oath essentially to an idea and in a legal framework for us to sort of work through our challenges as a free people in a free land. So I, at the risk of speculating a little bit, Paul, I would say, I think if we get to a place where senior leadership in the U.S. military believes that we are no longer playing by the Constitution as, if you will, the sort of overarching rule book for how we conduct self-governance in this nation, I, I don't know how that plays out. I'm cautiously optimistic that at some point senior leaders will be emboldened by the fact that they have an oath, and that the lion's share of them will remember that the oath is to the Constitution and not to a person. I think, and I'm a little guarded about this part of it, but I'll go so far as to say I think sometimes civilians sense that the military is so regimented that whatever the commander in chief says goes. As a judge advocate or as a former judge advocate, I will tell you that I spent a lot of my time, and I wasn't a judge advocate on active duty for all that long, but 5 or 6 years. I spent a lot of time talking to soldiers and commanders about the rules and what's a lawful order and what isn't. I was involved in several different military operations, and one of them comes to mind. In particular, was Just Cause in Panama. And I had a young non-commissioned officer come up to me. I'd been on the ground for maybe a week or so. A young non-commissioned officer came up to me, and he said, "Hey," I was a captain at the time. He said, "Hey, boss, I just want you to know that course that you gave in the law of war, it actually kept me from doing something really stupid when we had a couple POWs and somebody felt we should just shoot one of them because we run out of those little flex cuffs, handcuff things." And so I don't know. I'm cautiously optimistic that there's a line there where the U.S. military will say, you know what, this is not what we do. Now, where that line is and whether we ever get to that place, I don't know. But I have a lot of confidence in the character and the integrity of the majority of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and all of their leadership. And I keep leaving the coasties out of this, but I don't mean to. But I just think it's really important for the American people to have a high level of confidence that the people that are serving in the uniform of the United States of America are by and large, we're a reflection of American culture, to be sure, but by and large are people of character and integrity, and most importantly, are committed to selfless service in the support of their country, their countrymen, each other, and in the mission. And I think that focus on selfless service will pay big dividends in a pinch. So we'll see where it goes.
Up next, much more with Lieutenant General Charles Luckey. You can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website, stateofbelief.com. You'll also find links to topics we discussed this week, as well as transcripts and more. And make sure you subscribe at stateofbelief.com/subscribe. You're listening to The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. Welcome back to The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush. My guest is the former Chief of the U.S. Army Reserve, retired Lieutenant General Charles Luckey. I'm sure I've heard it, but that oath that you quoted that all service people are taking is really important. It makes me think that maybe really underscoring that right now within the military, but also actually among all of us as citizens, we're not held in the same way because we're not. But it feels like, that emphasis on the Constitution, on the, and the rule of law. It doesn't say that, I guess, in there, but it is when you focus on the Constitution, you're referencing the rule of law. So I found that helpful, and I'm just curious how civil society could be helpful as we think about, shoring up the Army, shoring up the Marines, shoring up the Navy, the Coast Guard, Marine, all of it. I mean, the armed services, I don't know if we have a role to play, but I do think that the way you laid it out felt very encouraging, and I'm not sure that the average citizen is thinking in those terms.
But let me flip the script, because I think that in a way, if you think about it, and I don't know, I can't speak for every civil position, but everybody who's in the United States Congress has taken that oath. It's an oath of office, right? I suspect, although I don't know it to be true, that most states, there's some sort of oath that elected officials take. I mean, the whole notion is you're serving the people, not yourself. So I think sometimes there may be some goodness in military people reminding people, hey, we're not the only ones that take the oath.
Right.
And so
100%. I love that.
So,
I think that's super smart. My father passed away a year and a half ago, and he was a JAG in the Air Force he served in the reserve for his entire life, reaching the rank of colonel. And I was not called in the same way, or it didn't. I had no friend in ROTC urging me on, but I do think,
for a grade in military history, remember.
but it was I do think he would stand up every time his the Air Force song was played in this little town on Cape Cod. That they played all the different, and it made us all so proud. And so I think it's really there was an integrity to him, and he was also a law professor. So I mean this idea of how important the law and is right now. And I would love to just put on that hat of yours right now. And because you practice for a long time, you have a lot of expertise in the law. How do you understand the law functioning right now? I have to say, there's both things that are encouraging, but other things that just mystifying to me as someone who grew up with this idea that, the law had to be respectable to be respected, but there was an idea that we could come to some legal agreements and that the law could do good. And so I'm just curious, what is your take, putting on your legal hat, and not keeping your faith hat and your military hat too far away, but what is your understanding of the role of law right now in our democracy?
So I do want to get to the extent that I have a faith hat, and I think I told you I did 4 years in the EFM program or the Episcopal Church. But I go back to, in the Army, we have a thing called the Soldier's Creed. And it's actually a wonderful document. I'm an American soldier. I'm a warrior, member of a team. I serve the people of the United States. I live the Army values, always place the mission first, never accept defeat, never quit, never leave a fallen comrade. And we go on and we talk about our readiness and being tactically and technically proficient, our adherence to values. But at the end of it, Paul, we finish out with, I'm a guardian of freedom and the way of life. I'm an American soldier and I live by this creed. So I spent a lot of time in command of a couple 100,000 soldiers talking to them about what's the American way of life. And and my obviously I have a view which I'm going to share with you in a second. But what I would tell them is it's not important for me to tell you what you think it is, but it's important for you to think about it because you're committing potentially your life to to defending the American way of life. So what does that mean to you? And I said, some of you probably at first start thinking about, the Super Bowl and ads and fast cars or F-150 trucks or whatever. I said, but I would submit to you, it's fundamentally about two things. It's about the rule of law and the opportunity for all of us that the rule of law essentially it aspires to provide for everybody who's here. I said, now, I could be wrong. I mean, I think everybody should have their own sense of what is the American way of life that's worth giving your life to defend. But for me, that was the operative going in assumption as to the thing I was defending potentially with my life. And oh, by the way, putting potentially a lot of soldiers in harm's way to do it. And hopefully very responsibly and mitigating risk where I could. So I think that the rule of law is fundamental to the American way of life. It isn't just an ancillary benefit of being an American. It's fundamentally a part of what being an American is supposed to mean. We ultimately place the law above ourselves, and we obey the law. And if we choose not to obey the law, which of course is a prerogative, then we, at least as adults, we expect to potentially acknowledge their consequences, and it could be incarceration or it could be X, Y, Z or whatever. But so to me, that's the big idea. Now, to the extent that your question goes to how do I think it's doing right now, I think I've written and spoken about this fairly openly. I think it's under siege now. Whether my own probably somewhat romantic, optimistic view is the law will prevail. I know there's a lot of Americans who don't agree with me about that, but I just think the rule of law is so fundamentally a part of by and large, the American cultural, philosophical DNA that I still hold to the belief that the American people, and again, this is nonpartisan. I'm not talking about people who voted this way or voted that way. This has nothing to do with politics. This has to do with, I think there's a lot of Americans out there that in their heart, soul, gut, call what you want, know that none of us ultimately are above the law. And if we get to a place where one of us is, or several of us are, then that's not, that's not what those guys were doing when they signed off on the Declaration of Independence in '76. So that's sort of how I come at it. I don't know if that helps or not, but that's sort of my view.
No, I think that
as a soldier, as a lawyer.
Well, I would say polling, reinforces your position that the average American person does not support the subversion of the rule of law. They don't like it when they talk about arresting Supreme Court justices. They don't like it when they talk about, when there is direct thwarting of ruling by judges or the Supreme Court. So I think that you're right. I think the question then becomes, at what point is the crisis? Because we're kind of in it right now, in that there have been orders by judges and the Supreme Court, and I know there's various interpretations, but ultimately to bring back people from El Salvador, to stop renditions, to support due process, and so it'll be really I think we're in the moment where we're finding out, but I do think that it's a very interesting idea that the rule of law is essentially the sine qua non of American life. And the rule of law, I think, it's also like, if you don't like the laws, we encourage you to change them. I mean, bad laws have been in place, and so that is a huge part of the American. What we mean by the rule of law is change laws that are bad, and we've had bad laws, and then we've made progress, or we've made sometimes not such progress. But I think it's important to say that doesn't mean the laws themselves are immutable, but that actually we've established laws, then we get better and better, and once we have laws, they get followed. Now, let me.
Yeah, well, and it's just as Robert said, and he basically said, hey, if you don't like the decision of the federal district court, that's fine. That's why we have courts of appeal. And I'd love to talk about Judge Wilkinson's opinion out of the Fourth Circuit.
That was like I've never seen if listeners, I do want to just spend 1 second on that, because Judge Wilkinson, who is I think a Reagan appointee, but a lot of my more liberal friends were like, I don't think I've ever agreed with any of his decisions, and then he wrote something that was as clear and as I just found it striking and strident in the best way about like the rule of law and where we were and about the clarity of this moment. So Judge Wilkinson's decision, if you Google it, I should be able to, maybe I can pull it up and we can read like just a section of it, but it is worth the read. It must have been 20 people sending it to me. And my family, which has a lot of lawyers, were just like, did you see it? Did you see it?
No. So yeah, I posted, I very rarely put stuff on LinkedIn that people have to read, other than every once in a while one of my columns. But I posted the order. I said, this is mandatory reading for everybody. Yeah. Every American should. And I don't care about the politics. In fact, I will say this about Judge Wilkinson, because I've actually argued a case in front of him in Richmond years ago in the Fourth Circuit, case I had appealed out of the Middle District of North Carolina in federal court. And I mean, Judge Wilkinson, I mean, he's tough and he's conservative, and he does not. I mean, I was arguing a case on appeal as a defense counsel, and it was an uncomfortable, 25 minutes. But I got tremendous respect for him, and which goes to my point, right? So you lose a case or you lose an argument. Fine, you don't call for the judge to be impeached. You appeal or do the best you can in the internal system. But anyway. I didn't.
I'll just say, my great grandfather Louis Brandeis was in the Supreme Court. Most of his career was spent in dissent. It wasn't like you don't win all the time, and then sometimes those dissents became majority opinions later. But not everything, it's not so easy. But anyway, Judge Wilkinson, we're giving you a shout out here. And that's really important. I'm sorry. So you keep going. I wanted to underline that reference point.
Yeah, I interrupted you. I just wanted to touch on the point that the Chief Justice made as it pertains to what's the appropriate remedy if you don't like what a judge ruled.
Right.
And I could get into other decisions of really fine jurists that have been, just pilloried by folks. And I think, I'll just say in a very disquieting sort of way. But all I'll say about this is I think the rule of law is under stress. I am not of the school that believes that we are at a constitutional crisis yet. As I think I've written before, you can sort of see it swimming into view, maybe. I think that's sort of what Judge Wilkinson is talking about as well in his order. It's almost a plea back to the executive branch to say, hey, can we just cool it down a little bit, and get back to kind of sort of how we do stuff. So I don't think we're there. I think, I'm not saying we won't get there, but I don't think we're there just yet. That'd be my view.
Well, can I read this one? I'll read the last paragraph
that
from Judge Wilkinson, because it goes exactly to what you're saying. Like, it's not too late, but it's on the horizon. It says, it is, as we have noted, all too possible to see this case as an incipient crisis, but it may present an opportunity as well. We yet cling to the hope that it is not naive to believe our good brethren in the executive branch perceive the rule of law as vital to the American ethos. This case presents their unique chance to vindicate that value and to summon the best that is within us while there is still time. Boom. I mean, pretty. I mean, talk about a
Mic drop.
completely, yeah, mic drop. Exactly right.
Yeah,
But it
yeah.
says everything that you just said. That this is
Much better
this.
than I did, by the way.
Well,
But
no,
it's,
but
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
in more kind of finessed language, in the sense that this is the incipient crisis, and there is still time, but in some ways, it's on the executive branch to make sure. We're gonna come back. You and I are gonna come back together, and we're gonna see how we did with predicting this and where this. If we're allowed to do this in the future.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the way we really connected was you were like, "Hey, Reverend, I'm also really interested in religion," and so like that does not surprise me. By the way, I mean one of the best parts of this kind of moment of crisis and stress is that how many people from different sectors have said, I'm actually working out of my faith. That's not what I lead with. That's not my organization, but I am working out of a faith context. And that has been so gratifying that I have been introduced to so many great new people who see our work and say, just so you know, I'm connecting with you on all kinds of levels, including the fact that I'm working out of a faith context, even as I work in a grassroots or a secular or a military or whatever. So you're in that camp, but a little bit stepping your toes. I've already said, like, you got to go to seminary and become ordained, but you keep on thwarting your call somehow.
My mind's still open.
Oh, good. Then I will just claim that I was the one who did it. Just like your ROTC friend, I will claim entire credit. Okay, go ahead. Tell us a little bit about like how faith plays into this general's life.
This general's life. So I was raised, as I said.
That's by the way the title of your new book.
I was working on the role of the wilderness in the age of epistemic warfare, but I'll take your counsel, Reverend. But we'll see. So I think that as I think for most of us, as we are on a faith journey, sort of whether we know it or not, the French theologian, but we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. And I think over time, I've just become more and more, and some of it's age and some of it's experience, just more and more cognizant of the fact that only in embracing sort of my own, what I call magnificent insignificance, am I able to become more humble, not modest, but humble in terms of sort of staying outside of my own self and thinking about others in ways that perhaps I hadn't thought about them before. If that makes any sense. And so, to me, I started off, in the Congregational church. As I said, my dad was a congregational minister, and my dad baptized me, and my dad confirmed me. I spent time as I moved around the military in different faith communities, Presbyterian Church, Episcopal Church, back with the UCC. I say back with the UCC, back in the UCC Church now. But frankly, it's the denominations have never been sort of the driver for me. The driver's been sort of more the community in which I find myself, and the commitment that the community has to both spiritual growth and to mission, sort of outside of the church itself. So, I spent a lot of time in the first Gulf War studying scripture a little bit more deeply. I came back from that and got myself involved in the EFM program, as I said, for the Episcopal Church, 4 years, sort of, weekend Bible study thing, but fairly extensive exposure to things that I hadn't really understood before about the Bible, and then over the years I've thought often about ministry and what does it mean, and believing very much that there are many ways in which we can minister, and then trying to figure out, sort of dial into what's my job now, because I think where I was 30 years ago, my faith journey is not where I am today. And I do think about it, as I've shared with you in another conversation. I do think about sort of what's, are there ways I could be more effective and as you would say, lean on the faith. I think I sent you a piece that I wrote several months ago when I was back at my dad's old church in Middlebury, Connecticut, and really had a absolutely wonderful experience on many levels. But one of them, Paul, and I think I did share this with you, is sort of getting back to, okay, so what do I owe to the secular world? What do I owe? What do I have to render to Caesar versus what? What do I owe? The Almighty and I Almighty writ large, which I think means sort of humanity, outside of just the sort of architecture of the United States. What do I owe to the humanity writ large? And so I owe. Like I think a lot of us, as I said, I'm not sort of on the faith journey, and I remain curious and open-minded, and try to learn as I go. I am, as I think I've also shared with you, very concerned about the church, sort of writ large, missing the opportunity that I think this moment presents for all of us. Because I think, as I've shared with you privately, I am very comfortable having this sort of conversation with you because I don't believe this is a political conversation. There are people who I guarantee you will hear this and say, that general shouldn't be talking about politics. And to them, I say, I'm not talking about politics. And if you think this is about politics, then you need to rethink what politics means in America. Because what I'm talking about is something that goes way beyond the political realm. And I think the church's opportunity to move into the space that, I mean, you know way more about this than I do. So I'm not going to talk about loneliness or people being despondent or people being sort of atomized by technology to the point where they feel genuinely alone, abandoned, socially inept at connecting with other human beings. I'm not going to talk about any of that, but I just think that there is such an opportunity for the church to not only do amazingly powerful work for the country, but recognizing that that's not the church's mission. The church's mission is to do amazingly powerful work. It doesn't have to be American work. It just has to be. I mean, we're talking about something
it's about
that
the
transcends.
people. It's also about people.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, that's when you say, I'm
yeah,
not talking about politics. I mean, politics. Politics is another way of talking about people. But I mean, and the church is definitely about people. And so, like, what I think you're talking about is like, how do we reach out to people? And I think right now, part of the problem with our politics is that we are seeing very, people are trying to find meaning, and unfortunately, some of the meaning that they're finding is in unhealthy ways and in ways that are, some of the ways that people are forming is, I would say is unhealthy to, diversity and unhealthy to a broader democracy. And so, like, how do we invite people into community? I think you would be, a really valuable voice in that, and we will continue to encourage you in whatever way. I actually I'm a little bit biased because I do think. I think that, the church is amazing. I wasn't going to be a minister, especially not working in churches. And then I worked in a small church in Manhattan. And exactly what you talked about, what moved me was the fact that we had we had people from different countries. We had people who were sick. We had people who didn't speak English very well. We had people who were homeless. We had people who had AIDS. In that place, and we had middle-class people and we had professional. In that place, they all felt that was their church, and they felt like they belonged, and they felt like, and I was like, wow, where else in New York would everybody, once they walked into that door, feel like a full part of the community? And that was like, and I was like, okay, so maybe this is something I can give my life to. So, I really encourage that, and I'm looking forward to continuing to get your. Get any words of wisdom you have out there. I think you have a lot to share.
Well, I appreciate that. The only thing I'd say in response to that is, I think it's Brian McLaren's book, Life After Doom, and I think that that book has helped me among other things, understand the difference between grief and despair. And I think that's, I think that the place I could see the church being able to really move in and help is in that space. Sort of recognizing that there's a love component to grief. You miss what you had, sort of thing, but you're not giving up. But it's okay. It's okay to grieve. But it helps to grieve together. And to be in the community. So,
Yeah, well, shameless plug. Brian was on this show talking about that book, and he's an incredible author and inspiring, and I think he was trying to help people not give up. And I think right now a lot of us, the role of a lot of us is to say we've got to keep on and we got to get stronger and we got to show up in really important ways. The last kind of tricky question I want to ask you is:
are you sure?
Nah, not forever and ever, but for maybe. There has been some talk about the Insurrection Act being invoked, and I think that would have implications for our National Guards. And I'm just wondering if you have any insight into what you could imagine happening if that actually does get invoked, or if there's other ways. I mean, even, more recently, there's been talk just about, that they're kind of gearing up for a summer of discontent. And I'm just curious, and there may be, I don't know how the military is factoring into, or, the reserve is factoring into this effort. But how do you read those tea leaves at this point?
So there's a lot of different ways I could come at that. I'm going to give you a sort of a non-legalistic answer, although I'm pretty familiar with the act and have spoken with a lot of folks and worked on a lot of aspects of modifying it for the benefit of everybody. Frankly, I don't regard that as a Republican versus Democratic issue. I regard it more as a balance of power discussion. And I think my personal view of it is it should be structured more sort of like the War Powers Act, where the first mover can be the chief executive, but at some point there's an accountability component to the whole construct. But leaving that aside, I would say because you talked about the summer of discontent or whatever, I think that, and I haven't done this, but I actually owe you a lot of products already, so I'll be careful with how I phrase this, but I probably need to go back and read a little bit more of Martin Luther King, some of his earlier work. I think that this is a time when leadership at scale needs to, when I talk about leadership, I'm not talking about the government. I'm talking about those who are concerned about potential government overreach, need to be messaging peaceful protest, peaceful conversation, political discussion, because I think that violence begets violence. And I also think that violence could very well create I won't say pretext necessarily, it depends on how it manifests, but create a reaction that would be unfortunate, strategically unfortunate for the country. And so,
yeah. No, I think that's a point very well taken, and I actually, it reminds me. In another life, I was also like interviewing people, including John Lewis, Representative John Lewis, who was referencing, the incredible discipline and training that went into the nonviolent resistance that they were doing, and said no one could go out there and just do it. They had to go through a training. They had to be prepared. I won't use the military because it's not the same thing, but in the sense that you had to be prepared for what was going to come and not react with violence. And that took lots of discipline. And I think that can be a spiritual role. Yeah. And it's
that's the word.
I think that's what I'm hearing you talk about, is that this is about training, discipline, understanding the broader mission of what you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to accomplish it. And I think that that's a super important point.
I just say it goes to the difference between strategy and tactics, right? Strategically, it's important that people stay cool. Tactically, that can be hard because in the moment, they're amped up, but that's where discipline kicks in.
Retired Lieutenant General Charles D. Luckey is former Chief of the United States Army Reserve. In that position, he was responsible for manning, training, and equipping a force of more than 200,000 soldiers and civilians across 50 states, 5 territories, and more than 30 countries. Having completed 3 combat tours, he is a practicing attorney and a leading voice for American values at home and around the world. Lieutenant General Luckey, thank you so much for joining me and all of our listeners on The State of Belief.
Oh, it's been an honor to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and all your listeners.
Who do you know who would get a lot out of this discussion? Please share The State of Belief with them and be sure to subscribe to The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Or, as I found out, you can just ask Alexa to play The State of Belief. We need your help to keep making The State of Belief. Please make a financial contribution today at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. The State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Paul Brandeis Raushenbush on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.